If you follow my travels on social media, you know that I chronicle the highs, the lows, the bare feet and misdemeanors, paper rattling, armrest battling, ferret smuggling, question asking, stinky food in a greasy bag carrying, badass kid having, the what are you reading, peering at my book looky-loos, and the blanket-wrapped pillows from home, booty short and bandana top clad, along with the ill-mannered fancy executives with no class in first class. In short, the depth and breadth of humanity, along with the delightful, the interesting, and the truly amazing human beings who sometimes sit next to me and are sometimes friendly and sometimes exhausting in the friendly skies. In the past few years, I've had so many encounters that I would classify as unsurprising, yet they are revelatory and heartbreakingly familiar to those who travel while Black. Here is a moment that I call Seat 6A, a rant in one act, contents may have shifted. A few years ago, while standing in line to board my flight to Zurich, I was ultimately en route to Milan, Italy for the annual Milan Furniture Fair. I was at gate C22 at O'Hare Airport, and Bob and Becky were also waiting for their flight to Zurich. United called for all boarding group 1 passengers, and Bob and Becky, but let's be honest, mostly Becky, stepped around me and in front of me to assume her self-proclaimed spot first in line. Clearly, I must have had on my invisibility cloak instead of my favorite travel wrap. Ever so politely to Becky, I said, "Excuse me, I'm also in line and you just stepped in front of me." Becky, her eyes opening in surprise as my invisibility cloak clearly and apparently fell to the floor, said, "Oh, well, this is boarding group 1. Are you in boarding group 1? At that point, she is peering very suspiciously at me, at my attire, at my carry-on, and anxiously looking for anything that for her confirms my status. I said crisply, "I'm well aware that this is boarding group 1. Becky, by now bristling, but steadfastly certain that I was in the wrong line, said, "Sometimes you people get confused." And well, now she's mumbling and fidgeting and looking at Bob for help. Bob is staring intently at his phone, and he stays very silent. I said crisply again, "Yes, indeed. The large number 1 on the sign does seem to confuse some people." Bob now looks up from that very intense game of Sudoku that he's playing on his iPhone. He moves Becky back and whispers something that sounds like, I thought it sounded like, "Let's go get magazines before we board," or "Let's go to the bathroom before we board," or "You've just made a Black woman angry. Oh, my Lord." Now it is, in fact, time to board, and I slip comfortably into seat 6A. It's my favorite bulkhead business class seat for overnight travel. I'm happily in possession of an upgrade and a sparkling pre-flight adult beverage. And I'll be damned, here's Becky, again. And there is absolutely nothing invisible about me now. It's amazing how very visible Black folks in business class can really be. Becky, by now clearly indignant and done, but feeling triumphant because while she couldn't move me out of that line, she is going to move me out of seat 6A. She said, "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Her nostrils are flared and her Ferragamo shod foot is tapping insistently. Me, crisp, calm. I'm very good at crisp and calm. It's a learned and necessary survival skill set for Black folks. Because if you go angry, Bob, Becky, Kevin, Chad, Brad, Heather, Karen, and Brenda will certainly call 911, which apparently is like a customer service hotline when you need Black people removed, either temporarily or permanently, because we know sometimes it can go either way. My crisp response to Becky, "Is there some kind of problem here?" Do you work for United Airlines, or are you just having a bad day? Dear listener, please note here that I was in no mood to show Becky my ticket or otherwise prove that I, in fact, belonged in that seat. I just kept sipping my sparkly drink in my sparkly plastic glass, smiled my sparkly smile, and I settled just a little bit deeper in my seat. Becky was not responding well to all of that sparkle, and she hissed in a sort of a stage whisper, "Bob, she is in my seat. Do something." So useless Bob in his blue blazer and khaki chinos, who clearly was not looking forward to 8 hours with Becky, who has just been infuriated by someone who doesn't belong on her radar screen, let alone in boarding group 1, or God forbid, in business class, who has not complied with how Becky thinks the world should operate. Bob didn't quite know what to do, but he uttered with a very long and defeated sigh, "Becky, we're in row 16, not row 6. And in that very instant, Captain I'm flying this plane while being this handsome comes down the aisle and says, "Good evening, Mrs. Durst. We're so glad to have you back on board with us. Please let us know if any of the crew can do anything to make this trip more comfortable for you." He looks at Bob and Becky and says, "You folks need to move along right now to your row because we've got other people boarding and it looks like Mrs. Durst needs a refill before takeoff." As for me, I had a smile for Captain Handsome and an ever so slightly raised eyebrow for Becky, along with some parting sparkle. And Becky, in fact, moved along, but I'm not quite sure she moved on because her perceptions were challenged and her contents were shifted.